What's going on, everybody? Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole here, back to the Thursday 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slot after adjusting off of that last week and then, not being here at all the week before. So for this week, I'm immediately, or not immediately, but nearly immediately, 1 week off, saying that I wasn't going to talk about Giants offseason hard knocks in the desperation to find some content this offseason. I'm going back on that pledge, as is my want, here as host of my own lightly viewed YouTube stream and podcast, a little more heavily listened to podcast than YouTube stream. Probably has to do that I did one before the other. But I'm going to go back on that because we have some reactions to that from this week, which filters into some stuff that I wanted to talk about. And it's going to live up to the name of the podcast here of Unexpected Points when I'm going to try and tie this into some of the philosophy stuff that I've been doing. Specifically, the allegory of Plato's cave. Now, I was gonna write this up too. I'm gonna flesh it out a little bit here as we talk about it, and then potentially also write it up. But what it really comes down to, what it's gonna center on, is a reaction to a reaction. I know we're getting kind of meta here for the reactions to the reactions, but that's what we're doing in the off season. So the exact thing that I'm talking about here, when I'm talking about the reaction to the reaction, is a tweet that came out from Awful Announcing, which is an account that, they're aggregating. They're out there, they're on the aggregating streets here. I'll bring it up for those of you watching on here. You'll see that I have a lot of people muted in the comments underneath, just because I got a lot of people muted, a lot of people who I follow. So it's not that I don't like them; it's just try not to muck up the old timeline here, as I try to stay on here as infrequently as possible, but still necessary to get some content. So this Awful Announcing summary of Pablo Torre talking on the Dan Le Batard show. We're going like 3 different layers here. Awful Announcing talking about Pablo Torre, who's on the Dan Le Batard show. He and Domonique Foxworth are part of this discussion on the Le Batard show. So the headline, and of course, this is all that people are looking at when they're reacting to something on the Twitter bot, not the fuller fleshed outedness of what has been said. Literally 3 words is all that's being pulled out here, where for Awful Announcing here, the quote of the tweet is, Pablo Torre is sick of NFL film analysis content, and now here's the quote, we fetishize, make sure I can say that correctly, jargon. So of course, it's got some reactions from the people. As we float down here, Quincy Avery, who is a quarterback coach, says quite possibly the weirdest take from a really smart person. Normal measured stuff here. Okay, so here's good. Dimitri, I don't know what this is. Poetic Love. I don't think it's any big account. No, 569 followers. But he has a good little comment on here, which is going to feed into what I'm going to talk about mostly on here. It says, film is the only surefire way to see what's good and what's bad about the player and or team. So keep that in the back of your mind, because I've also saw some quote tweets from people that break down film that says it's the only way to get the full picture. Surefire way. Film doesn't lie. We've heard that take before. Somehow that still is permeated out there, despite the fact that, every NFL team is watching thousands of hours of films of NFL prospects, and half of them are busts every single year. But anyway, let's get into what actually happened on the pod. I mean, on this this YouTube stream that I clipped from of the Le Batard show when Torre's talking about this, because I think he has some good points outside of this fetishizing jargon bit. And really what people are just upset about is the NFL film analysis content, him denouncing that somewhat, or pushing back against that somewhat. So let's bring up an exact clip of what was said. Probably should have gotten this video file ready to go a little bit earlier. Where is it? Oh, great. Now you're seeing the sausage getting made here. That I don't have it right in front of me, which I probably should have. I thought I had it right in front of me, but now I'm having more difficulty finding it. Okay, let's just go ahead and go to the YouTube on here so I can find it a little bit more easily. So it's Torre talking. It's Domonique Foxworth talking, and I think there's also someone else in there, although they're not really saying a lot as part of this. So actually, you know what? I have this here. Let me go ahead and save this so I can present this a little bit more easily. I'll save this to the desktop here. Okay. Did that work? Let's see. Okay, that one's going to work. Okay, let's bring it up. Sorry for the delay here. Again, technical difficulties. Maybe not my my forte here. All right, let's go to the desktop. Let's bring this up. Okay.
And you know how I know football season's almost here? Because we got quarterbacks on whiteboards and hard knocks.
Oh,
Listen to my man Drake May get me fired up for football season.
So again, they're going to talk about Drake May on the whiteboard, talking on Hard Knocks, talking about this is the Giants, remember? So it's really Dable going back with him, back and forth about some different concepts. So here it is.
Gundolphin right, 72, Tundra, float, H angle.
Gundolphin right, 72, Tundra, float, H angle.
Yes.
Okay, so there's Dable giving him a slew of the play call, and now going back and forth with May about what this means.
So Tundra stands for what?
200.
200s, and what does float stand for?
It's got the corner of the out.
And flag. We call it a flag. So I mean, we end up saying corner flag, but it's
Flag
flag.
with the
So
out,
flag,
and
and the
H
angle
angle.
is an angle. You got me on that?
Easy stuff.
Then you use
Easy stuff. I like that one from Drake May. Trying a little too hard, but it's okay.
Rita to the right, Linda to the left. It was a flip formation. Good?
Rita to the right, Linda to the left.
72, 5-man protection, slide to the will. So if the strength of the formation is right, what formation is that again?
Yeah, Gundolphin right.
Yeah, right. He's there. The will's over there. The line would slide there. We'd say 72 Rita.
72 Rita. Gotcha.
Okay, so that's the clip. That's the clip from Hard Knocks. And a lot of people were sharing, and of course, you know, we're in confirmation bias season before the season even starts, of people saying, I knew Drake May was going to be good because of this clip where I guess they're vibing. They're vibing here. But let's hear what Foxworth and Torre have to say about it here.
Oh, look at everybody's
This is like
fired up.
foreplay.
Oh,
I
was
hate
getting so-
I hate this entire genre
Hold on.
of video, of person, of cultural trend.
What is wrong with you? How could you not appreciate that?
All we just heard was a bunch of jargon that 99% of the audience has no idea what it means at all.
And you don't have to understand it to enjoy it. You don't, a Gundolphin right don't get you fired up. You are not American, my friend.
This
Okay, so that's the good part here. It is a lot of jargon that no one knows what it means, but even as they do kind of explain what it means there. And I think the more important point, and I'll get into this a little bit more earlier, is that it's just a bunch of jargon for stuff that's not like that impressive, quite honestly. But okay, let's go back to what Torre has to say here.
spider to Y banana shit.
Oh.
We call that a post. Oh yeah, easy. No problem. No problem.
Yeah.
Little
We're just
corner,
gonna-
little flag. Oh, yeah.
We're just
Gundolphin
gonna, we're just gonna say vocabulary words that no one
Tundra?
understands. Dude,
Rita, Liz, Rip.
We're not even
Lindsay?
at the MLB All-Star break. You got to still be in base. You can't be in football mode yet. Billy, I need you
Okay.
here so badly.
David, you
This is David Sampson chiming in here. No one gives a shit about baseball. Stop.
have to
can't be in
understand
football mode.
what's happened to American sports. Not only has football overtaken the entire calendar, but football players being nerds.
Oh,
What happened? Why are football players coming for my corner?
that's why. You're jealous, huh?
But they're not even doing anything that
not a
anybody
hater.
understands
Just
in the least.
You're so
I don't even know if
inconsistent.
Drake May, if his ability to do any of that is going to translate to actually being good at quarterback. And
Okay, so that's the main point here. And this is the point that I agree with Pablo on, is whether his ability to do that has anything to do with translating into being a good quarterback. That's an important part. And again, we'll let him elaborate a little bit more before I jump in with my takes.
so here is this whole like American Idol contest of can you say the most amount of just bullshit that I presume is really something.
But that's the point. It's not bullshit. Just because you don't understand
But
it.
for
doesn't-
everybody else, Domonique,
I saw
it's
a
like
video.
watching someone speak a language and be like, yeah, that's
No, but for Dominique, he's
Very impressive.
excited because
Okay, so okay, I want to hit on that one. This is actually a great analogy. It's like watching someone speak a language and then think, that sounds impressive, right? Let's face it. If you are a good old-fashioned American like myself, we don't know shit about other languages. Proudly. I mean, it's not just some sort of hubris or superiority complex. It's like, logistically, there aren't a lot of reasons to learn other languages if you're in the United States. I mean, maybe Spanish should come up from time to time. But this is Spanish speakers within your own country that you're trying to communicate with, not Spanish speakers generally because you're traveling somewhere else to communicate with that. We're not in Europe where there's a bunch of different countries in the same place. And, English is the dominant language throughout the world. It's more likely that you would be able to communicate with someone in English someplace else as their secondary language than you would ever need to communicate in your secondary language to someone else's primary language. Okay, I'll be off that. I'll put my GOP platform down after that one. But to go back to it, because we know so little about other languages, if you hear literally like a toddler speaking in another language, at least for me, and again, proud to be an American here, you're like, oh, that sounds good. Like especially if they don't look like they maybe should know another language, you're just assuming, the way that they can, the mental dexterity with which they can flip back and forth between these two languages. You're like, oh, that's pretty impressive. But then when you think about it a little bit more logically, right? Like learning a language, just because it's a language you don't understand, doesn't mean that knowing it is at all impressive or a differentiating factor or something that is difficult in a different environment. Now, in my environment, the environment that I grew up in, and now the environment that I am currently as, knocking on the door of 50 years old, not having a lot of experiences speaking other languages, basically no experience, at least in any sort of fluency speaking other languages. Yeah, it would be tough for me to get going on another language. It'd be something impressive. For these toddlers that I'm watching, it's not impressive at all. It's just like it just happens. And if you're a quarterback who was, brought up in a particular system, which is similar to these overly verbose, jargony systems like the West Coast offense in the NFL, it becomes second nature. And it's not really a binary sort of thing that you can do it or can't do it. Now, I'm sure there are some stories about NFL quarterbacks who come over to, come from college to the NFL and they can't pick up the system. Now, we're literally like trying to force them in very quickly into something. I'm sure they'd eventually be able to get it, learning at a later age, even if it's in your early 20s, as opposed to going into some of the stuff when you're in college or you're in high school. It makes a difference. Your ability and willingness to study these things, and when systems change on an annual basis, we see very often all these different systems have different language. Just like there, we talking about post versus flag versus this. Like they have different names for different naming conventions for the same exact thing. It's like different dialects within the larger language of the NFL. It's still not in and of itself an impressive feat to be able to spit back this type of language and to know what these things stand for, where quite often, so these are just words that start with a certain letter, that letter indicates something. It's not, it's not rocket science here, right? When you're talking about the different types of linebackers and who they are, I mean, very often it's just identifying their positioning by the first letter of what we're talking about. It happens a lot for different play calls or audibles or things like that. Again, not rocket science. It's just a different dialect of maybe somewhat of a similar language, which everyone can be accustomed to and then integrate into, and becomes secondhand, becomes something they don't have to think about. So, but I think what Torre is saying here about this makes a lot of sense, and the language analogy makes a lot of sense. It's something that sounds impressive if you're an outsider and you have no ability to grasp it, but then you realize that this is just something that everyone does. Like speaking Spanish. I can't speak Spanish, but everyone in a Spanish-speaking country can speak Spanish. It's not like people don't learn how to speak the language in these countries. It just happens. It's not as impressive as we might think, but yet somehow it translates through because it's so jargony, it's so dense, it's something that's so foreign to what we're hearing that we attribute some sort of ability to it that really isn't a differentiating factor as far as who will be a good quarterback or not. Okay, let's go back to more of what they're saying about the different way the content, and then we're getting more into like the content industry and some interesting things and what they're talking about and what's happened not only with film but then also with stats. I mean, stats are victims, not victims. Stats are perpetrators of this sort of thing too when it comes to having a special type of knowledge and certainty about it.
Can I say this has been one of the great magic tricks of football media over?
Okay, this is Charlie Kravitz, who works over there. He might follow me on Twitter, so shout out to Charlie.
The last
Thank
decade,
you.
which is saying that like if you can't identify coverages or know what the play is, you don't understand ball. You don't know ball. You don't know how good XYZ player is if you aren't looking at their air yards per attempt or their EPA per play. No, we know. We watch the same football on Sunday as you do, Domonique.
No, see.
Okay, so this is interesting because again, it's like the difference between knowledge and I think prediction. And I'm going to get in more into this. Like, yes, if you can break down a play, you have more knowledge. Does that make you a better at predicting what's going to happen or understanding? I don't know. Well, we'll have to figure it out. Let's listen to Domonique talk about this as a former football player.
That's it. You've made a leap. You put me in a category where I'm saying that no one can appreciate football unless you appreciate it on the levels that someone else appreciates.
Yeah, I was gaslighting you.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that is objectively awesome.
Okay, so
And
that's,
you know how I
that's
know
what they're
football
trying
season-
to say. That was the dispute here. I'm not even sure where in the clip, honestly. Pablo says that it's fetishizing jargon, but that's the whole clip. So I think there's two different things here. Makes sense in the fact that it is like becoming a bigger and bigger part of content, and we see this as something that's very impressive because we don't have that much familiarity with it. But at the same point in time, maybe it's something we're overestimating the unique ability of this sort of thing. So this comes to my larger film versus stats and content take. Okay, there is some useful film content in like what has happened. Like someone can tell you on a particular play what has happened as a film analyst much better than I can. Okay. But normally all of these film analyses, either explicitly or implicitly, are in the service of a take. Okay. When Dan Orlovsky gets on here to like break down a few plays of Dak Prescott versus some other quarterback or something like that, it's normally in the service of a take. And a take, in a way, is a prediction. And what we found is that this is something that's been documented over time. Super Forecast is a big one. Experts are not good at predicting because they overvalue their own knowledge in particular things. They can be more knowledgeable and worse at predicting. Okay? But this is like a highly engaging content. So I think people need to figure that out. More engaging than stats. Okay. There's a reason why there are now tons of former players coming out of the weeds, tons of amateur film hipsters who post, videos and do other stuff. Tons of that's being followed, that's getting viewed, that's getting large followings. You don't really see that with stats people because it's not as engaging of content. But let's not mix words about it. It is content. It is something that's evoking a feeling and a knowledge, and then in service of a take, which is not necessarily better. So the take is not necessarily better at the end. You may be learning something about the specifics of the play, but I don't think you're getting any more knowledge about the truth, the overarching macro truths that we're trying to figure out when it comes to a lot of these football things. But it is more engaging content. Okay, it is content. That's what people all need. People view it as if it's something different than content, but no, it is. It's content going towards a take. And this is what brings me. This is what I'm going to make a big the leap here to see if anyone will indulge me on this, to how I believe this translates and matches somewhat when looking at stats, when looking at box scores, when looking at film, trying to figure out the truth of what's going on. It is kind of the take, quite honestly. Like the take is searching for the truth. When we're ranking quarterbacks, we're searching for the truth. When we're saying a team is better than another team, we're kind of searching for the truth in some sort of way. When we're saying so-and-so is a bad prospect or a good prospect, we're searching for some sort of truth in a way. And all of this is in service of that. And this is when I'm linking it into the allegory of the cave from Plato. And I think it's helpful. It's been helpful for me to think about it this way. Maybe it's as, intellectual masturbation on my part to go further into this than is necessary. But hey, here, this is what we're going to talk about. So, of course, this comes from Plato's Republic. It's book 7 of Plato's Republic. And if you look at it, and I'm going to bring up an illustration here for those watching so we can get a little bit better idea. This actually comes from the article that I'm putting together here. And I'll put together kind of an illustration of Plato's cave. So I'm going to paraphrase here rather than go into somewhat of the dense and maybe not as easy to follow language as Plato goes through this. So just, the whole thing, Plato's Republic is a dialogue. And in the dialogue, it's Socrates, who is Plato's mentor, teacher, whatever, speaking to Glaucon, and I forget who else, but I think it's Plato's brothers. So, but Plato's writing this, and he's writing for all this. But that's the way that's the story. So Socrates is saying to Glaucon and others listening, he's giving this allegory of the cave when it's talking about how do we find the truth and our current situation that we're in versus the situation in figuring out the truth. And I think this applies somewhat to how people may view like knowledge of just watching the game versus breaking down film versus all these or other sorts of things. So the allegory of the cave is, first, the thing you have to imagine is that imagine at the bottom of the cave, and this is meant to be an analogy of kind of where we currently stand as humans here. So at the bottom of this cave, people are chained to a wall in the middle of the cave. So there's a wall in the middle of the cave. They're chained to it facing towards the back of the cave. So it's all underground. There's a path that leads underground all the way to the end. So they're chained to a wall facing towards the back of the cave. They're locked in place. Their heads are locked in place. Everything's locked in place. So they can't turn around. They can't look. They can't do anything else. All they can see are the shadows on the wall in front of them. And these shadows are produced by the fact that there's a fire behind them. So closer to the entrance of the cave, there's a fire there. And then between the fire and between the wall, so the light coming from the fire onto the wall, between that, there are men down there who cannot be seen by the people that are chained up at the bottom of the cave, cannot be seen, who have objects that they're bringing across So the shadows of these objects are on the wall. And that's the only thing that you can see at the bottom of the cave. So what the allegory is meant to say is that's the position that we're in. It's not just that we don't see the truth of things, is that what we're actually seeing is a representation of an object that, again, is not the truth, is mostly what we're seeing. So again, we're seeing these shadows on the wall, and we take those to be reality because we know nothing else other than reality. But then the reality is, even behind that, these are just objects that people are putting up. And then as you progress even further and you get all the way out of the cave, you can see the sunlight, which they say is the notion of the truth and the good. And then you can actually see things the way that they are. Now, I think a good way to break this down when we're thinking about how we view different sorts of sports analysis, and specifically in the NFL, when again, this film analysis is becoming a huge, huge piece of content, source of authority to how everyone's talking about these things. What I think is a good way of looking at it, and this is what Socrates says specifically in here when he's talking about the realm of sight. He's saying that everything is in the cave is all within still the realm of sight. And a good way to break this down, and this is how someone has done already, so I'm going to kind of look at how they have classified things, and I'm going to classify in my own ways, is that they're saying the shadows on the wall are opinions, illusions, these sorts of things. The chained prisoners are human conditions. So what I would think of as think about it this way. The shadows on the wall that they're looking at, you could say, in a way, you could even say stats or something like that. So it's like a shadow of something. It's a representation of something else, right? Stats, opinions, takes, commentary, all those sorts of things are what we're all taking in as the truth in different ways. A lot of conflicting truth, but a lot of different truths that we're being presented with, ideas of truths that we're being presented with. And that's what we have to go on. So that's what the shadows on the walls are. Now, what Plato talks about here, I guess, or Socrates, if you want to say him, because he's the character who's giving this allegory in the Republic. What he's saying is, imagine if you broke free of these chains, if a prisoner broke free of these chains, and he starts to ascend up the cave. And what he realizes first is, oh, okay, what I was looking at before, those were just like shadows of these other objects, right? And he sees the fire and he thinks the fire is kind of like the sun. The fire, and it's illustrating the truth of things, which are these other objects that I was only seeing the shadows of before. Again, these objects are just being held up by people behind a wall. There's not the reality of the situation. It's just the objects. And now that I see these, like I'm free from just seeing opinions and illusions, and now I see the truth. And what's been labeled on this illustration that I'm showing on YouTube is that they call the wall and the objects and the fire the visible world. And I think that's good. I think that's a good analogy to use for the visible world. Because again, the entire inside of the cave, according to Plato, is the visible world. So what I would label it as is I would label this a lot as like watching football or consuming film. Okay? Where what we're seeing when we watch something, we're not seeing the truth directly. We're seeing, like, if you watch one play, let's say, of a quarterback doing something, of Patrick Mahomes doing something, he makes a bad play and he throws an interception. Well, we're not seeing Patrick Mahomes. The truth is Patrick Mahomes is a bad quarterback, right? Like, we're not seeing that. We're seeing a representation, a piece of something that's emanating from the truth. Okay? And that's what the wall and the objects and this being displayed by the fire. And that's also what the film analysis is. And I think this is the major dichotomy. And the problem with what we're having here is that as a lot of this NFL content has broken free, right? The content providers and the fans and the others who are watching, they're no longer chained prisoners. I can't believe I'm doing this Plato's analogy, but I'm going to do it. Okay. They're no longer chained prisoners down at the bottom of the cave, only hearing what, Bill Cowher is telling them on the television about what's going on, or seeing clips of highlights from the angle, from the television angle. So you're not the all 22. So you can't see everything that's going on, not knowing what the play calls are, not knowing the little nitty gritty details of everything. Just looking up the box score stats, looking at all these different types of shadows on there. Now we have broken free because of the proliferation of the internet, really, so people can get their opinions out there a little bit more often, the proliferation of film data, and just so many different avenues for people to distribute their content, right? I mean, yeah, you have like the Dan Orlovskis of the world who will give a little spiel and shtick that they do on an NFL show. And of course, it doesn't hurt that Dan Orlovsky is like a good looking guy and he's like cool or whatever. Actually, I don't know if he's cool, but you know what I mean? Like he looks like a quarterback, right? So he's got that going for him. So not only is that happening, but you can also have, the Underdog show is doing things with a bunch of different film. You have other sorts of podcasts that are breaking down things which become video podcasts. You have clips from the Ringer and Ben Solak and other people over there breaking down things. It's almost a never-ending number of avenues, and people can just, like how Orlovsky started, was just putting these things out, I think, on Twitter himself before eventually working his way to ESPN. So now like people have been broken from these chains and just seeing the opinions and the illusions, and they're seeing now the visible world much more clearly, or the details of what's going on, more details that feed into the visible world, like the play calls, the ideas, the concepts of these different plays, this and that feed into the visible world much more clearly. And they think that they're seeing the truth. They think that this is it, right? There's nothing else to aspire to, basically. This is the full truth. The film doesn't lie. And in a way, and this is when the problem comes into being, is in a way, when they were only seeing the shadows, the echoes, the opinions, the illusions, there was a degree of uncertainty that was inherent because no one actually thought they were seeing directly the truth. Now, we had very strong opinions based upon these things, of course, and a lot of confirmation bias and all that sort of stuff that's going in there. But because we're detached a little bit, like we're not an NFL player, we're not a coach, we're not inside of every single meeting and inside every single huddle, we're not hearing every single concept, we're not seeing every single thing that's going on. We're detached in a plausible sort of way where no one could think or could convince themselves into thinking that they're directly seeing the truth in these situations. So inherently, there's a degree of uncertainty which comes into it. But now that people can think that they're directly seeing the truth in a way, that uncertainty can fade away. Again, the film don't lie can fade away. The fact that people say this is the only way you can get a full picture of what's going on, and assuming that's happening and being this, but that starts to fade away, and that becomes a problem because the reality is, whether you're looking at a box score, whether you're looking at a take, an opinion about something, whether you're watching something on TV about a particular player, whether you're watching YouTube clips, or whether you're doing intense film breakdown, you're still all within the realm of the cave. We're still all within the realm of representations of the truth. These are representations of the truth, right? These are not the truth. Players can have an entire bad season. And if that's all we have to base it on, is that the truth for how good they are or bad they are? I don't know. Probably not. Obviously, there's a range of outcomes. There's variance. There's other things that go there. So, but what's the thing that we're aspiring to is to answering these questions about what the truth is. We have to get out of the cave in order to figure out what the truth is. Now, stats do a great job in some ways, because even if they are shadows of what's going on inside the cave, even if, let's say, someone, doing PFF, doing tracking on particular plays, they're watching something. So that would be like directly watching the objects inside the cave and the fire behind them. they're watching something happen and they're logging a broken tackle or something like that. So that logging of the broken tackle in the stat is now the shadow or the echo of the thing that they're looking at. Now, the thing is, though, they're not looking at the truth and then logging a represented truth. They're looking at these objects. And these objects are approximations in some sort of way of what the truth is, right? Like, generally, quarterbacks who look good or players who look good, who play well, who look like they're good players are good players, and vice versa. But what happens is, in some ways, logging, even if they are shadows of what's really going on, if we can study that, if we can study those shadows, we can get a better idea of what's actually outside of the cave, because what's going on inside the cave is a somewhat of a representation of the truth that's outside of the cave. It's just not the truth itself. So what analytics and other sort of analysis is doing is let's log, let's try to figure out, let's use our tools. Let's apply these tools to data that we're getting that we know is not the truth directly, to try and look, quote unquote, out of sample, look to see what the truth is, right? That's what the truth is. The truth is what's out of sample. The truth is what hasn't happened yet in your data set. The truth is what you're trying to predict. All good estimations of the truth are going to be good predictions. If you really know something about something, you'd be better at predicting something about what's going to happen, right? Not explaining what has happened. Explaining what has happened is knowledge of the particulars of a play, but it's not knowledge of the truth of, like, who's good, who's bad, all these sorts of things. So by collecting these stats, we are getting an idea of being able to push forward and to think about the truth. But the key is we still have to think about the truth, which is outside of the cave, which is outside of what we're watching, which is outside of film analysis, which is outside of former players breaking things down. It's outside of all of that stuff. So how do we extract ourselves from the cave and think about some of this stuff? Well, we're never fully out, right? What we're really trying to do is like poke our head outside, recognize what's outside, and then the lived world inside the cave is still where we're getting all of our concrete signals. So what we want to think about is, again, that this goes back to, maybe let's use the analogy I talked about last week about play action, right? We don't want to get too focused on film watching and being like, oh man, that Derrick Henry, he's really big and looks imposing, and I can feel something watching, like a guttural feeling watching it about what he's doing to the defense. And I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my God, look, they're running the ball so much when they're successful, even though the correlation causation relationship is backwards. So there's that part of it. But we also don't want to get too much into looking and saying, hey, look at our shadow of this play. Our EPA per play is telling us that it doesn't matter at all who the running back is. So therefore, that's the truth. The reality is more complex, right? The truth is something when we're trying to gauge someone's reaction to play action. It's going to be represented somewhat by what we see. It's going to be represented somewhat by what's on the wall, but it's going to be represented most by the truth of what the feelings are and the effects are and the predictable patterns are for what is going to happen. And I thought that's also an interesting point that comes up many times during Plato's Republic when we talk about the truth, is they talk about, like, what is the truth? What is the reality? They talk about the patterns. So like a focus on understanding the patterns. I don't know. That sounds a lot like prediction to me. That sounds a lot like trying to do out of sample type of analysis to me, right? But the key is we're still, even when we're trying to predict something out of sample, we still have to make sure we're never measuring directly the thing that we're trying to figure out. We're still representing opinions, illusions, shadows, echoes of the thing that we're trying to figure out. And that's why things can change. And also the reality is, what's going on outside of the cave, there's non-stationarity. In other words, things change a lot. There are movements. there's uncertainty, there's everything else that ends up flowing back into the cave and where we are. But the most important thing, and again, the thing that I want to emphasize the most, and maybe I'm just being a hater on the film analysis, is how people have fooled themselves a little bit by looking at the visible world, the film, the play calls, all those sorts of things, getting closer and closer to reality and how it's played out here in front of us, and thinking that that is the truth, and not seeking further beyond that to find the patterns, to find the reality, to find the ability to predict, to find the truth behind these different sort of situations. I mean, I'll let a film analysis, film guy. I mean, I'll be very, very aware of the fact of the uncertainty in different predictions I'll make for quarterbacks going forward, and having range of outcomes and having things like that. At the same point in time, because of the detailed analytical nature of how those predictions are put together, I mean, I probably put them up against, any film analysis, trying to discover what the truth is in a much more certain way. I'm sure they're going to be have much less uncertainty, which again, the uncertainty is kind of like part of the truth, right? Is being able to recognize the uncertainty of everything around us and the variance of everything around us. And that applies to everything, right? That's one of the biggest functions of inconsistency and poor thinking when it comes to experts in a lot of areas, is not appreciating that uncertainty. I'll put what I'm doing up against what anyone is doing, even though they fundamentally think, and I think everyone just from intuition would assume that they are closer to the truth of what's going on because they are breaking down the exact plays as they are happening. Okay. All right. So I don't know. That was was that good? I don't know if that was good or not. We'll see if I stick with super unexpected points going on forward or not. Anyone who's listening in, I know I didn't solicit a lot of questions before this, but I'll answer some questions now. One other guy I want to talk to, and maybe in the same vein, is I was listening to some of Ben Gretsch. You may not know, Stealing Signals. He has a very successful Substack. I got to get him on the pod here because I want to talk to him. He has some talent-based takes where I don't know if I quite agree with them, versus some stats-based takes. So this will get more. We'll get more into the truth of things, and I think it'll be good to have some people to bounce some ideas off of. I'm just lazy. That's why I don't get as many guests as I probably should on this here. But drop any more questions if you have them as I'm talking here. Okay, this is more of a comment here. Kind of reminds me of the Moneyball scene where they're talking about how hot the guy's girlfriend is. I mean, it's similar. It's similar in a way, I would say. Again, yeah, we're kind of in a dead period of content for the NFL, so maybe that's why the Drake May thing popped up so much. But yeah, it doesn't tell us much of anything here. Okay, this is part of the Q&A here. Would it be useful to take some kind of test of biases a scout may have towards players before they watch film, and could that improve their analysis of film? Hope that made sense. That's interesting, because that's, I mean, because ideally, if you have access to scouting reports, let's say prospect scouting reports on the inside of an institution, ideally you'd want to have some sort of rubric for grading players that's going to allow you to aggregate the data about what different players are doing. For every line that you could write up to say, oh, they have, good explosion out of their breaks as a wide receiver or something like that. Well, that sounds like something we could maybe at least attempt to quantify, and then have that data for all the different receivers. And we'll get an idea as to whether or not how that correlates with eventual NFL success, whether it's correct or not, maybe even looking into what's going on with these scouts themselves and the biases that they may have going into it. And I think that is an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that a lot, but I think it makes sense to think that, especially for bigger name prospects, people probably have feelings before they even watch any of the detailed all 22 type of film, before they're on the clock as scouts and looking at particular players. They probably have opinions on these guys, and that's going to bias what they're doing when they're tracking things. I mean, I think the only way that you can try and cut down on that is to have something try to make as objective as possible the evaluations that you're doing and how you would express those. But that's a good one to think about, because yeah, the individual scout probably makes a difference there too, not just logging what the scouts are doing and then trying to use those to make predictions into the future, but making sure that, how do you think about the biases of the scout themselves before they even start the process of doing any analysis. All right, I think that's pretty much the only Q&A I have in here, so I'm going to log off a little bit early. Again, we still haven't gotten into much when it comes to training camp and other things that will popping up here. I'm going to see if Ben Gretsch, maybe he'll come on next week. He should be doing lots of stuff here to pump up his Substack going into the season. If you have any more questions, you can go ahead. Follow me on Twitter at Kevin Cole _. Shoot me a note. I think the email is unexpectedpts@gmail.com. Or if you're getting this, if you're subscribed to the newsletter for unexpectedpoints.substack.com, if you just reply to anything that gets sent out on the newsletter, I'll go ahead and get that email and I can try and answer the questions going forward. But until then, that's all I got for this week. I'll be coming at you next week with hopefully some real concrete news for what's going on. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll be talking at you later. Take it easy.